I'm here with George Martin of Carnism Debunked. Welcome, George, to the channel.
Yeah, thank you, Haz. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Yeah, likewise. And George and I were just chatting on the little pre-stream window here about his channel and some different issues in the vegan world. Uh, and we've got a lot to talk about today. So I guess maybe we'll just start with this question that I posed to you that pertains to carnism, and wondering how you would define carnism, or like, is it just non-veganism, or what is carnism?
Yeah, I think carnism has a deeper psychological meaning than non veganism. So, carnism was the term coined by psychologist Dr. Melanie Joy, and it more sort of explores the reasons as to why we treat certain animals in certain ways, the defense mechanisms we use to justify it, um, the general justifications and what they mean, why we see certain animals in certain ways, um, the societal conditioning that we go under, which causes us to eat and wear certain animals. So I think it's a much deeper meaning. It kind of means the psychological side of why people are not vegan, I guess.
Gotcha. So I have a question about that. Can somebody be a carnist and not be a speciesist?
Um, no, I don't. I'm not sure how that would work unless you have like a unique point that I've not heard before that you're gonna
No, I
put to me
certainly
about
don't.
this.
No,
No,
I
but
certainly don't.
yeah, no. If someone was a carnist, they would be a speciesist because they're treating animals differently from how they're treating humans. To such obviously, I mean, we're all to a certain extent going to treat species differently, regardless of whether we're vegan or not. But they're treating other species in a way significantly that's different from humans, say, or even dogs, despite there being no morally relevant trait difference between those species.
Gotcha. So would you say it's fair to say then that somebody can be non-carnist or even anti-carnist and still be speciesist?
Yeah, I actually think we're all speciesist to a certain extent. It's just that when vegans are speciesist, it's kind of meaningless because it's to such an arbitrary level. The way in which vegans are speciesist, it doesn't really have any super meaningful results. It's like, okay, um, I squished an ant as I walked to the shops today by accident. I'm not going to cry over that like I would if I like stamped on a kitten's neck or something by accident or something like that. But I actually see there as being non-arbitrary justifications for me not feeling as upset about that. I can actually describe morally significant differences between the ant and the kitten. With non-vegans and they're, I don't know, gassing pigs to death, slitting lambs' throats, whatever it is, the differences they're describing between why that it's okay to do this to one species and not like a human or a dog, say, are completely arbitrary. They're meaningless. So I would describe it as I'll describe speciesism amongst vegans in the same way that people might have like a certain bias. I don't know, it could be towards gender or something like that, but it ultimately results in something kind of meaningless. It's not like the sexism. It's not like, I don't know, sexism we could see with like a really meaningful impact. It might just be like a, oh, men can't multitask, or oh, women get emotional sometimes. Now that's, I guess you could call that like a form of like sexism maybe that doesn't really have any meaningful impact.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that with regard to like the gassing of pigs, or like kind of the confinement, enslavement of other animals versus the incidental stepping on a bug, for
Mm-hmm.
example, by a vegan, the intention is really what matters, it sounds like.
Not just the intention, even because even if I was to step on a kitten's neck by accident, let's say there was literally zero intent, and I think my cousin actually did this a few years ago. I think he like accidentally or when he was a kid, maybe he like accidentally he was like walking back from the fridge and he accidentally trod on like a kitten they had and broke their back.
Oh man.
So no intent there, but my God, this would like you'd have a sleepless night, right? I mean, horrific.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't do the same if you accidentally squished an ant. Well, you might do, I don't know, but I like that. So even where there's no intent, we're still speciesist to an extent. You or I, we might cry if we did that to a kitten, but maybe not an ant. So we're speciesist to a certain extent, but that's because, in our sense, we can actually name morally relevant trait differences between the ant and the kitten that would justify our sort of difference in emotion at doing that. Whereas when carnists say, yeah, it's okay to gas a pig and it's not okay to gas a human, they can't name morally relevant trait differences as to why that is.
Sure. I'd be curious as to what you would consider morally relevant traits, just to touch on that, if you could, like between an ant and a cat, for example.
Yeah, I'd think that cats, while ants are intelligent creatures, I think they just possess a much, much lower level of sentience than a kitten would. If you obviously the brain sizes are just astronomical between a mammal and a little ant. I do believe that a kitten would suffer a lot more if you were to break their neck, whereas with an ant being squished, they might not suffer at all. They just go boop, and their life is just kind of over.
Question: do you think, like, if you were to slowly torture an ant,
Hmm.
is it possible for them to suffer more? I guess, like, is the suffering less in your estimation because of the duration that it takes them to die? Like, once that accidental action has kind of commenced, or is it
Um,
more of a neurological thing?
Yeah, I think it's a neurological thing. I don't know to what extent insects could be tortured. Obviously, it's cruel, and I'm not. Obviously, please don't do this,
Of
anyone. Like, if
course.
you were to pick a spider's legs off or something like that. But I don't think they would suffer to the extent that, hacking a cat's legs off with a knife while they're still alive would do. I do think they would suffer. I think they would feel it. But as far as I'm aware, ants, spiders, and so on, they just don't have the nervous system that like a mammal does. Whereas the mammalian nervous system is very, very complex, like mine and yours. A cat's nervous system is like mine or yours, right? Whereas an ant's, I just don't think is anywhere near that level. With ants and stuff, they have sensory stuff that they can like move away from heat and stuff like that. They know this is dangerous, I better move away from this heat source. But if they were to like go into like a fire or something like that, I don't think they would feel it in the same way that you or I or a cat would.
That's interesting. I mean, I've thought about this at length, and part of me actually thinks that if their nervous system is more simple, that it might actually indicate a greater receptivity to pain from from those signals. If that makes sense. Like, if that's all that they have to preserve their life.
It's actually kind of that's more to do with intelligence. So Richard Dawkins brings I know the point you're talking about because Richard Dawkins talks about this. He made, the rather horrific point to think about that actually if a species doesn't have the complexity of thought like a human does, they might feel pain to a greater extent than a human does because pain is a signal to say don't do that again. Now, you or I, we know not to stick our hand in a fire. We know not to shove a needle into our eyeballs because we just know that that's harmful and that's bad. I don't know, a gecko might not know to the extent that we are that a fire is bad or shoving a needle into their eyeball would be bad. So their pain that they would need to feel would have to be greater than ours to say don't do that again. But that would be more comparable with creatures who actually do have a complex nervous system but lower intelligence, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a dog or a cat is less intelligent than humans, but they still have a very complex nervous system. So I don't think what you're saying would be applicable to like an ant or a spider, where it's just like their nervous system is a lot less complex than a mammal's.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I mean, I think ultimately we may never know. It's one of those things where you kind of have to be in that being's position. But I mean, I don't disagree at all that I would feel more saddened by stepping on the neck of a cat than I would accidentally stepping on the neck of another animal,
Yes.
like an insect. It's always interesting to kind of explore these topics. So I kind of want to get back to veganism in general, and just wanted to kind of get a read from you on kind of like how you define veganism. Like if somebody was just to land on planet Earth and say, "Oh, vegan," like what's that? Like not how might you explain yourself to them?
Sure. So a vegan is someone who rejects the use of animals as resources for humans, I guess. So we see them as we recognize that animals have moral personhood and that they deserve to be not treated as commodities for human use, whether it be for food, clothing, entertainment, using them as vehicles like horse riding and camel riding and stuff like that. So we reject animals' commodity status at the hands of humans.
Yeah, I really like that definition. Um, I know we briefly talked about other definitions before the stream here. I think that that's a really good one. I also like to just subscribe to this threshold deontological approach where I'm just like, as far as we can, we'll just treat them like humans in terms of respecting their negative rights.
Yeah.
And I find that one to be really beneficial in talking to non-vegans personally, like when I'm doing outreach and things like that. When I talk about like no animal use, um, flat out, it tends to sometimes um, get people to kind of hyper focus on their behavior too much, kind of all at once. Um, Kind of like whenever vegans end up putting up barriers to people going vegan, whether they're behavioral, political, what have you. It always makes the idea of it seem more daunting to the prospective vegan. But yeah, I really like the non-commodification as just like kind of an academic definition. um, I know we talked a little bit about like the sentience of an ant or the sentience of a cat, for example. Would you say that like a being's value is intrinsic value, that is derived from their sentience?
Yeah, I think sentience is a morally relevant factor, a very morally relevant factor. Otherwise, why, you could go into the whole carnist territory of, plants, though, because they're living things, whatever, right? But because they don't have sentience, it's just there's no moral value to cutting a plant, right? But I guess the way in which carnists use sentience, it's still such an arbitrary difference in sentience between a human and a pig that doesn't justify this massive difference in treatment. Obviously, there's going to be some kind of difference in treatment between a human and a pig because we're different and there's different levels of sentience and intelligence. But the difference between a human and a pig with regards to sentience, intelligence, is far too trivial to justify stabbing one, gassing one, locking one in a gestation crate, and then just leaving the other alone and giving them moral consideration. It makes no sense when the difference is just so trivial. But sentience is a morally relevant trait as it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Would you define sentience just kind of generally as the capacity to suffer?
I would more define it as the, what it means to be aware and awake and like alive in here. So while a plant is living, they're just basically a body with a body that breathes. There's just no moral value there. Whereas a human, a rat, a fish, a cow, we're sentient. We're able to experience the world, have emotions, actually exist up here. We have a brain. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's also important just to um, put out there that, I mean, even if plants were sentient, that it would still be an argument in favor of humans living vegan.
Yes, absolutely, it would. Yeah, because veganism minimizes resource use, minimizes land use, minimizes deforestation, minimizes crop use. So yeah, to anyone out there who's non-vegan who's watching this stream and genuinely does believe that plants are sentient, yeah, please go vegan because that would be the best thing you could do for your position.
Right. And I think that would be a really good segue to this idea of being able to go vegan for reasons other than for non-human animals. Like you'll hear people say like, well, Like, that's cool if you're vegan for the animals, but the animals don't care why they're not being tortured and killed. They just care that people aren't eating them. And personally, I resonate more with the environment, and and therefore I'm vegan for the environment. Um, how would you kind of respond to that?
Well, it's a ridiculous claim that the animals just don't care the reason people are vegan for, and they can be vegan for the environment. Because what they mean when they're saying that is they're assuming that veganism is just a dietary thing. They totally forget the elephants being, smacked with bull hooks and stuff to torment them and make them submit to elephant rides in Thailand and places like that. They're totally ignoring, lambs being put onto live export ships, slave ships, and sent across the sea to have their throats cut for the wool industry. They're totally ignoring the rabbits in the Angora farms in China having their fur ripped off, shrieking while they're still alive for scarves. So people who say the animals don't care why we're vegan and you can be vegan for health, well, of course the rabbit who you're wearing for the Angora scarf, of course they of course they care, because you're not vegan if you're funding that, and they're suffering horrendously.
Right. Yeah, it's everything you say is true. It's just, I guess it's difficult sometimes when people try to almost like position themselves as somebody who kind of cares more animals, even if they're like, well, no, like, I'll occasionally have some cheese or something like that.
Yeah.
And lost you on the camera there, by the way. Not
Yeah,
sure.
sorry, I've just sorting out some. Hold on, what's going on
Oh,
with
it's all
my?
good.
I'm trying to click start cam, but it's not happening. What's going on? Sorry, I'm having a few tech issues here. Let me just
No
unplug it and then
worries.
plug it back in.
It's all good. But there we go. You flashed forward. You flashed on for a second.
Hold on, settings, FaceTime. No, I want that.
There we go.
All right, there we go. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, no worries. What you said about well, I totally agree, about those people kind of like virtue signaling in a way. It can be really frustrating, just to vent, when people are just like, well, you apparently don't care about all the animals that I'm saving by um, reducing my animal intake, let's say for the environment.
Yeah,
And I guess kind of brings us to this idea of like, um, I guess, like, does you had the video, I think it's your most popular one actually, about vegetarianism being the opposite of veganism.
mm.
I saw your discussion with Reasonable Vegan about it. And I tend to agree more with your view on it, if I'm to be frank about that. I guess one thing that is kind of interesting to me about that is this idea of like kind of kind of on the topic of the animals not caring why they're being saved. Do we care that like people have a moral stance when it comes to the issue? In other words, like if a person didn't contribute to animal exploitation, commodification, etc., but they just didn't believe that it was the right thing to do, to avoid animal exploitation, commodification, etc. If they were just kind of incidentally avoiding, or not avoiding, but incidentally not contributing to those things, would it matter to us at all? In other words, like if
it,
somebody maybe were legally compelled to
yeah,
not.
it kind of does matter actually, because we need it to matter for the moral fabric of society. Let's compare this to sexual assault. Let's say someone said, "Oh, the reason I don't sexually assault is because I might get an STD." So people out there, make sure you don't sexually assault. It's very harmful to your health. Like, what kind of civilization would that be where we're living in, where that's the reason not to sexually assault? The reason you shouldn't sexually assault is because of you're victimizing someone. So it's the same with when it comes to animals. Like, let's say we did hypothetically have a society of people, and it's like, the reason you should not breed cows and slit their throats and smash their babies' heads in with pickaxes and stuff is because the environment. You know, what kind of society are we building there? That's the reason not to do things to sentient beings. That's not a civilization I want to live in. I want to live in one where we actually recognize the moral value of the victims.
Right. Um, how would you respond if somebody posited that that's kind of like a very far off goal and kind of an overly idealistic one, and that in the meantime, it might be a more pragmatic approach to just get people to do things like meatless Mondays, or like, kind of like reduce their animal exploitation contributions, whether it's meat, eggs, dairy, all of the above. And just kind of like maybe even if, if let's say you had this option to press a button where 10% of the population could go vegan immediately. When I say vegan, I mean like they're abolitionist, vegan, completely 100% representing and embodying the philosophy of veganism to a T, versus 90% of people, let's say, going completely plant-based. So they're not eating like meat, eggs, or dairy, but they just don't have any kind of understanding of animal rights.
Um, there was a few questions built in there, so I just want to clarify.
Sure.
What was the first bit you asked?
I guess like how you would respond to this idea that it's more pragmatic to get people to reduce. And I guess
Okay.
if there's a threshold at which you would say, okay, these people aren't vegan, but they're reducing to a sufficient extent that I'd rather take that than, let's say, like 1 out of 10 people going like full vegan. If full vegan, I say in quotes because we know vegan is vegan, but if that was the kind of question, and would there be a threshold, I guess, there?
Mm. Yeah. So here's the thing: when people talk about like reducing and stuff like that, if the message is strong and you promote abolitionism, people will reduce anyway. We've all seen this with our own family and friends, for example. Like, if you promote a fully strong vegan message, you're not promoting just stuff like meatless Mondays and stuff like that. I guarantee you'll know people. It could be in your family, it could be your friends, whatever. They've just naturally reduced anyway as a result of just hearing like your advocacy or whatever it is. They might not go vegan, but they will actually reduce. So you're getting that anyway from them. And then on top of that, when you promote an abolitionist message, you're going to get the people who fully do take it seriously and go the full step, which you wouldn't get with reducitarianism. Reducitarianism is just like, yeah, just give everyone the easy goal, but it stops there. Abolitionism is you give people the quote unquote hard goal, and some people will reduce, and then you get some people who actually do the full thing. As for some kind of threshold, yeah, I'm not really sure. But I guess the problem I would find was, let's say we did promote a reducitarian message and it turned out that more of society ended up reducing than would otherwise go fully vegan if we promoted an abolitionist message, if that makes sense. I still don't think that this leads in the future to animal liberation. So I don't know exactly what the threshold is. I'm not very good at these things.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about the idea of like, let's say, 90% of people becoming completely plant-based in terms of their diets,
Yeah.
um, versus 10% of people going vegan. And obviously this is just a hypothetical scenario. I mean, neither of us have the power to do this. So
Yeah.
we're just kind of throwing out ideas here. But what I would see as a possibility is that those 10% of people who go vegan, maybe in the short term, may not save as many animals in the short term as 90% of people going immediately plant-based. But and of course, this is assuming that somehow the supply of non-human animals uh, doesn't immediately kind of all die. I guess
Yes.
that's also relevant. I mean, they wouldn't be bred in as many numbers going forward too, so there would still be saving of animals, future animals there. But what I would be concerned about, to kind of touch on what you were saying, is that it's a it's a path. It paves a path going forward that doesn't seem as conducive to animal liberation.
Yeah.
And um, another thing that I think is blessings. Another thing that I think would be worth considering is that if 10% of people actually did go vegan, then think about, like, how many people work in a slaughterhouse, for example.
Hmm.
Imagine one out of every 10 of those people going vegan. You'd have a massive shift in the industry, like the industry signaling. Think about all the marketing, boardroom, places and things like that, like in corporate America and beyond. I see that there'd be just this amazing shift in terms of the culture. Like there's that
Yes.
3.5% effect. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's like it posits that it takes 3.5% of the population to um, to instantiate major social change. So I imagine if 10% of
Yes.
people became like, full, wearing a V on their heart, on their sleeve kind of thing, you know what I mean? Like, I
You've
think
made
it
a
would have a
great point.
huge effect.
Absolutely. I think reducitarians underestimate the power of the social shift it would be if just an insignificant, in their eyes, number of people went vegan. You get that snowball effect. Um, that theory you were talking about a moment ago, the 3.5% stuff, we've seen this in society as it is. We're literally seeing this with, like, we're seeing stuff like, I would say it's actually a tiny, tiny minority of people who hold like certain views now on certain like gender stuff that would not have flown a few years back. But because it is above 3.5% or whatever it is, even that now is like, we're seeing stuff like that about their own like views on gender and stuff. We're now seeing like the corporations actually kind of take that on. We're seeing schools and universities and stuff take on these ideas and actually push these ideas. So if it works with like kind of stuff like gender ideology and stuff like that, there's no reason it can't work with vegan, with just a tiny percentage of people.
Um, yeah, it's a good observation. This brings me to the question about, I guess, whether this has anything to do with ourselves as well in terms of principle when kind of like making this decision. Like for you, let's just assuming that you would rather, you would kind of sway toward the vegan side when it comes to the threshold. I guess maybe let's assume that your threshold is very high, if that would be fair to say. Um, do you think that part of that may have to also do with your own principles in terms of like not wanting to sign off on any kind of animal abuse, in terms of like if you press that reducitarian button, you are uh, condemning those animals to be tortured and exploited. Whereas if you press the button that makes the population of vegans jump from zero point 0.5 or 1.5 or whatever it is globally to 10%, you're doing something that's kind of kindling hearts, opening minds, helping people make the connection with the greater animal kingdom. And essentially you're doing something that's all good, like you're doing something that's only good in a way.
I'm not sure I'm fully clear on the question. What is it exactly that you're asking?
So I'm asking, like, do you think that there's a like kind of like a trolley problem issue here where
I see.
just like somebody might choose not to take a train off a track where it's about to kill
Yeah.
5 people in order to make it kill one person, um, out of the desire to not cause harm. Like, do you think that it might also have something to do with, I guess, not wanting to be the cause of something, almost like kind of trying to choose not to choose in a way?
Yeah, I definitely think there is basically a kind of trolley problem thing going on here. And it's why it's such kind of a hard debate with a lot of contentious points, I guess, on either side to have. It's about like, but I think you made the right observation a moment ago. We have to think about long term strategy here, not just a short term thing. So maybe it's not so comparable with the trolley problem when we actually think, well, actually in the long run, it's not like you're just instantly saving this group of animals or instantly just saving this one animal or whatever, and then that's it. I think it has much deeper meaning for our future when we're talking about the vegan message and whether we promote reducitarianism or abolitionism.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted to talk briefly. I know we talked a little bit about like sentience and how that kind of gives animals a large part of their I guess I should say our moral worth and value. do you ever kind of think in terms of like an axis of intrinsic and extrinsic value when you kind of calculate moral equations, if you will? Like, for example, I would, in my estimation, I would say that plants have extrinsic value, but I wouldn't say that they have intrinsic value. Like, I don't think that a plant's
Hmm.
life matters to the plant.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and just describe what you mean when you say like extrinsic value. Do you mean like what plants offer to the planet, or do you just mean like in that they look nice, or what would you mean by that?
Sure. I mean, I think their aesthetic qualities are part of what they offer to the planet. Obviously it varies plant to plant, but I think extrinsic value would kind of just, it sounds almost like a capitalistic concept in a way, but it's not. I just mean more like how you can contribute to the enjoyment of life for others, basically, or for the planet.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I don't think I have any kind of points of contention with that one.
Cool. Um, and I guess like, if we were to think about sentience being the main kind of uh, thing that we look at when we talk about the value of a non-human animal or human, for example. Do you see anything wrong with, for example, like people dumpster diving and finding like frozen uh, cow burger patties or something like that, and eating that? Like, do you see anything wrong with that, like in a moral sense?
Yeah, this is one of those kind of weird philosophical head scratchers that there's no real way to give a massively concrete answer to. But yeah, I would see a moral issue with it in the same way I would see someone, I don't know, doing something with a human dead body. But ultimately, like, you just can't, it's so incomparable to these non-grey areas, i.e. what's happening to the in the slaughterhouses. The whole dumpster diving thing, I would just say, is such like a grey area that
Yeah.
it's one of these things that like it's one of these things that carnists even try to like distract you with,
Yeah.
because
Well, I
it's
might
like,
posit. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
no, go on.
I was gonna say I might posit that it's actually not that great of an area. Are you familiar with Ingrid Newkirk's unique will?
I know who Ingrid is, but I'm not familiar with her unique will. No.
Yeah, so I think this page is called Ingrid Newkirk's Unique Will, and it's basically describing what she would like to happen with her remains. And I think one of the first things, if not the first thing that she says she'd like to happen, is some kind of barbecue with her body. Um,
Wow.
Yeah, and I mean, in that case, like, if there were people working at PETA who went and ate part of her body at the barbecue, I wouldn't see any moral issue with that, and I wouldn't consider them non-vegan for participating in it. In fact, I'd probably prefer vegans eat her than non-vegans. Like I'd rather people not like hate eat her. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, I guess it's kind of different there because it's like there's that consent given by the
Consent. Yeah.
person once they're alive as to what happens. Whether it matters what you do with someone's dead body once they're dead, this again, it's one of these weird philosophical grey areas. But we do frown on it in our society if someone like desecrates a dead body in any way or something like that. And ultimately, that's what you're doing with dumpster diving and stuff like that. You're taking someone's body parts out of a dumpster and chewing them and stuff, and it's kind of I don't know. It's just kind of, it plays into this kind of weird zombie culture image. Like, do we really want a society of people walking around chewing on dismembered body parts and stuff? Like, when you think about it, it just sounds kind of dystopian.
Yeah.
Now,
I
do
don't
I have
disagree.
Absolutely. Now, I'm sure someone could pick holes in my argument there and saying, well, actually, like, if you take this into consideration, there are many positive factors of this and blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, that's how I would just speak about it, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you're kind of speeding up maybe a process that might happen in nature whereby an animal's body would get decomposed by microorganisms, you're kind of taking that ability away from those animals, like in that instance. Um, and yeah, I think like when we think about like what 40-year-old vegan said about looking at animal body parts as food still seemingly perpetuates the idea that they are a commodity. I think that kind of highlights what you had just said.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
Great point.
one thing that might be important to consider, though, is that there are like restaurants that have vegan, and I say consider not as a counterpoint, but just like along this vein is there are restaurants that are non-vegan but have vegan burgers. If we eat at such a restaurant, do you think that we have like a stronger obligation in that moment to wear, let's say, like a vegan T-shirt or something than we would when we're out jogging or something like that? You know what I mean? Do you think that like if we're doing something that could possibly be perceived as a non-vegan action, that could hinder our efforts for advocacy, or do you think that that's kind of a little bit too overthinking it?
Yeah, it's maybe overthinking it. I mean, personally, I wouldn't, I wouldn't want to go in McDonald's wearing a vegan T-shirt. That would be kind of weird. It's kind of like a weird. That's kind of a bad look, like in the vegan community for one of us, right? No, even though I do support buying stuff from non-vegan chain restaurants and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't see there being any kind of. I mean, great if you. I mean, obviously, I would support activism inside a McDonald's restaurant of any kind, but I don't know if there's some kind of obligation to like wear like a T-shirt in there any more than there would be out jogging. As I say, it might actually just kind of look a bit weird because you've gone into what's seen as this like one of the biggest animal murdering corporations, and you go in there with wearing a vegan T-shirt, but not to protest it. You're going in there to buy a burger. I don't know. It would just kind of look weird.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And this kind of reminds me a little bit of the idea, like when we talk about commodification of animals and kind of eating their body parts, of lab-grown flesh, like animal flesh, or maybe I don't know if other things can be lab-grown. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think that it's something that, at least let me tell you my thoughts on it.
Sure.
I would say that it's not like a vegan thing to do, to participate in the consumption of those things, even if they can be produced without killing animals. Like even if you can take a hair off of an animal, or find one that fell off their body, let's completely rule out the idea of hurting them in any way. But I think that if that industry were to take off, I think it would be good for reducing the amount of animals who are tortured and killed.
Yeah, here's the thing. I do support the lab-grown meat movement. I hope that it happens because I just want the animal holocaust to end ASAP, right? But, yeah, whether it's a vegan thing to do or not, yeah, I think you have a point. It would be kind of strange because, again, you're still, in a sense, promoting that idea of animal body parts as food and stuff. Even though it's not come from an animal, it's just been created in a lab, but it is still an animal body part. It's very weird to think about how they're doing this.
It kind of reminds me of the bivalve thing. And I've been surprised and I've been disappointed from what I've heard from fellow vegans about this. Like, I'm just like, it's such an easy heuristic just to say, I'm not going to eat animals, I'm not going to commodify them and do that. Like, it kind of troubles me a little bit when people kind of look for exceptions to the rule, kind of a thing. Like, almost like people will almost follow this idea that the exceptions make the rule, rather than see them as exceptions to the rule, that we should just be like, oh, they might not be sentient, but doesn't matter.
Well, let me offer a bit of pushback on that point. Now, if veganism was to be seen as so dogmatic that, let's say it was proven outright that oysters and mussels just aren't sentient, they are just like these floating plants. Because we give them the benefit of the doubt, right, as vegans. We apply what you'd call in philosophy the principle of uncertainty. So don't do this to this being because there might be some kind of chance that they have moral value because they might possess some tiny level of sentience, whatever it is. Let's say it was scientifically proven that it was just like literally eating a cabbage. That would be an own goal for veganism because we we wreck the plants though argument from carnists. We laugh this argument out of the room. We think it's a joke, the whole plants though thing. Would we not then become that with oysters and mussels if science just said boom outright, no, there's literally no chance whatsoever they have any form of moral value, sentience? It is just like eating a rose petal floating in the sea.
Sure. I mean, I don't think that science is designed to make such statements with certainty, because I think, like,
Mm-hmm.
what makes a theory strong is its falsifiability.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the uncertainty would always exist, but if we could know with absolute certainty, then sure, like I wouldn't see them as morally valuable, just by virtue of belonging to the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
But I just don't think that there could ever be a time scientifically that we were sure of that. Um, you know, I hope this isn't sounding like conspiratorial and things like that. But it's just the way that science is structured, renders a theory stronger if it's falsifiable. It's the whole, like, what atheists will often say about people claiming that there's God, and how since that is unfalsifiable, that it renders that theory weaker.
Yeah. I guess it's not something I've really thought about before, to maybe to the extent that you have. But what would be, let's say science said straight away, let's say scientists said tomorrow, boom, it has been proven outright, the whole scientific community agrees that oysters are just the same as, like, floating carrots or something like that. They have literally zero sentience, they cannot suffer in any way, they have no life experience, they're just a piece of flesh in the ocean. Would you then say it would be acceptable to eat bivalves, or no?
I mean, if them having no sentience was proven, like if it could be proven, then that's a huge if.
Yeah.
And also if that meant that they had no desire to live, that essentially there was nobody inside, that there was no subject of that
Mm-hmm.
experience, I would say sure. But I mean, even the fact that they can kind of flap or whatever and swim away
Mm-hmm.
from noxious stimuli, like that shows me that there's somebody inside. Um,
Sure.
so
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, you and I both agree on this with the principle of uncertainty, that we should not eat oysters and mussels and stuff like that. I'm just saying, in a hypothetical world where scientists just said no, boom, like it's outright proven now. There's no more debate. Oh, and by the way, when they're just swimming away and stuff, they're just reacting to stimuli in the same way like a chili pepper releases like spices and stuff when you bite into it as like a defense mechanism, but the chili's not feeling anything.
yeah, it
Um,
kind of reminds me of like when people boil lobsters alive and they're like,
mm,
the lobsters are screaming in there, and people are like, oh, they're just releasing gas pressure or something like that. you
yeah.
know it's just like, it's really easy for us as the oppressing species to see things from very convenient vantage points.
Well, it's funny that the whole sound of the lobsters in the pan and stuff. I just think it's funny whether they're right or wrong about this, that they will just say no, that's just the sound of like the pressure whistling in their shell, whatever. But then they'll literally say plants scream when you pluck them out of the
Right.
ground, and they emit these tiny. So it's like, no, the lobster is just that stimuli, but the plant that's really the plant like screaming. Like, so there's just a huge.
Yeah, I mean, you could write a book about Schrodinger's carnist, and all the different ways that they argue against
Yes.
their own arguments.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite example of that is humans are animals, humans aren't animals. It's the whole don't. How dare you say the animal holocaust? How dare you compare humans to animals? And then literally 1 minute later, they'll just be like, humans are animals too, because and therefore you wouldn't stop a lion from eating a zebra. So why am I not just like the lion? It's just like, well, you've just compared yourself to animals. So
Right. And I mean, even more shamefully in a way, people will say the humans who were oppressed in the the historical event, the Holocaust, were treated just like animals.
Yes.
You know, it's even a more blatant contradiction.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah. Humans were treated like animals in the Holocaust, but no, animals are not treated like humans in the animal Holocaust. Yeah. Try work that one out.
yeah, it's never ceases to amaze me how people will come up with ridiculous arguments.
Yeah.
um, yeah. So something else that I wanted to talk about was this idea of language in general and the use of language, and and I guess like whether it matters if we refer to non-human animals, for example, like does it matter if we say something? Maybe these are each like kind of a case by cases thing, but I guess I'll start with just pronouns for other animals. Like, do you think that it's problematic to use the word like it, for example?
Yes, I do. So, ever since I've been vegan, and way before the whole human pronoun culture stuff happened, I was very, very consciously, and well, I say consciously, I just automatically didn't do it, to be honest, because I was recognizing animals as sentient beings. Yeah, I've never been calling animals it since I've been vegan. Now, this isn't to do with one of these, what some people could call like a woke thing about like, respecting pronouns or something like that. This is literal objectification. This is not just a case of, this is not, oh, you might offend the dog or the cat
Right. They don't
if you
have any
call,
concept of pronouns.
right, by calling them it. This is about, you are very much playing into the carnist perception here that animals are resources, are objects. If you start referring to animals as it, that just plays into the carnist mantra. Farmers want us to call animals it. It's completely, contingent to the psyche of society. If it's very, if from a very young age we're calling animals he and she, the farmer just jabbed her onto the truck with the electric prod. The farmer just took her baby away, and now he's shooting him, the calf, in the head. This is actually, promoting the idea that animals have personhood. They're actually sentient beings. They're he's and she's. They're not its, they're not objects. The use of it has helped carnists to detach from the reality that they're murdering a sentient being. And this is how all oppressions in history have worked. Look at this, the black slave trade, for example, where black slaves were counted as, what was it? Were they 3/5 a person or something like that? And then in countries where women are brutally oppressed under like Sharia law, they count as like half a witness in court or something like that. They might use, certainly for black slavery, they would have said things like it and stuff about the human being subjected to this horrific oppression. So language is very powerful in the way that we do that. This is not some kind of woke thing. This is not like, this is not about causing offense to anyone. This has meaningful real world consequences.
And I think something that's interesting to note here is that some people will defend the use of it with non-human animals and say, well, that's what we call them when we don't know whether they're male or female. And
And we shouldn't there. Yeah, we should call them they like we would if
yeah,
it is a human. Again, this isn't the pronoun stuff. This isn't anything to do with woke culture or anything like that. Even people who don't believe in like non-binary and using they them pronouns, even they would say, see, I've just said it there, even they would say, oh, someone's dropped their phone on the floor. They've dropped their phone. Let me check who it was. So they're referring to a singular person here whose gender they don't know. It's the same with an animal. We wouldn't say, if we see someone's phone on the ground, we wouldn't go, oh, someone's dropped their phone on the ground. It must have fell out of its pocket. I better ring its contacts.
yeah, or someone dropped its phone.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really hard to convey this idea that other animals are someone's, like that they're essentially people. Like I think that they ought to be viewed as other persons.
Yeah.
And I think like it's just as simple as being the subject of an experience. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the YouTube channel Perspective Philosophy, but But
Yes.
yeah, he talks a lot about this when talking about veganism, about the idea of being the subject of an experience when it comes to moral considerations for other beings. Um, I'm curious how you feel about other. I'm pretty sure I can predict what you might say, but like use of language, like if somebody says like "kill two birds with one stone" or something like that, that's just seemingly very innocuous. Like, do you think that it's worth our energy to try to say like, um, don't say this, say that, or do you think maybe it's just something that we should incorporate where we don't say "kill two birds with one stone"? We might say like "feed two birds with one scone" or something like that.
Yeah, I do like that take on it, like the feed two birds with one stone and all that stuff. Yeah, I don't see why not. Like, if I was to catch myself using one of these essentially speciesist phrases, one of these old speciesist idioms that is now like just as part of our language due to our dominance historically over animals, yeah, I would feel uncomfortable about using such language, and I do still feel that that feeds into that kind of narrative. So I do think. Then again, I think there's idioms where it is okay okay to use. You know, if you say someone is like a lamb to the slaughter, or something like that. I mean, lambs actually do get slaughtered and stuff, and we're just saying that person got screwed over, kind of thing. So there's, or end up with egg on your face. I don't see anything wrong with using that. Oh, this guy ended up with egg on his face. It just meant there was. It just means he's he's made a fool of himself or whatever, and like egg on your face would be a bad thing.
What
But
about like
yeah,
calling people like a snake or a dog or a rat or a weasel or things like that? Like,
yes, I avoid using those. There's one or two I slip up with on, but I don't think they matter as much, and I'll tell you why. So yeah, I've never called someone like a rat or a pig or a cow or anything like that as like some kind of insult. Vegans should absolutely avoid doing that because it's like, I don't know, it's the same as like using a homophobic slur to mean bad,
what
people.
about silly goose? Because you're saying that the goose is silly,
There are ones that are kind of less.
a
There are
gray
ones that,
area.
yeah, there are ones that are kind of more trivial and just a bit like, yeah. Um, but because if anything, silly is just kind of like the benevolent term of stupid kind of thing. Like we even say about our own beloved companion animals, oh, he's so silly or something like that. So I don't think that's as bad. The ones I do say, I might say, uh, what a bitch this person was or something like that. But I think the term bitch now has just become so far removed from the fact that it's a female dog that it actually sounds funny now to call a female dog a bitch. So it's just totally reversed. It's just like a complete reversal in what it means. I'll give you an example of this that's quite a crude example, but this will just drive my point across. If someone said, I've got a 3-year-old bitch in my basement at home, you'd call the police. But they're obviously talking about their female dog. But the point is, that word has now just become so far removed from what it meant. Whereas when you call someone a pig, you actually do think of a pig. Oh my god, what an ignorant fat pig this person is. Oh my god, look at this woman, what a rude cow she is. You actually think of those animals, and that plays into the hatred of those animals. I don't think bitch does the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think personally, I think there's value in actually using words with their intended original meanings. Like, you know, I'm a fan. Like, if I happen to be petting on someone's dog, and they were like, "Yeah, her name is Lucy" or something like that, I might be like, "Oh yeah, I have a couple bitches at home too." You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I might say something like that, and I think that that actually does promote societal progress because, like, it's important to kind of understand the original meanings of language. And I think there's also just going back to the idea of like these old sayings and kind of how speciesism can be embedded in them. It's important to consider, I
Mm.
guess there's some instances where like, you know, failing to think of an example at this exact moment, but there's some things that people, it's like, did you know that this actually had racist origins. You know what I mean? When people think back to these, like, I don't know, nursery rhymes or whatever kind of stuff that we were
Yeah.
just taught as kids. And I think it only serves to accelerate moral progress if we can kind of um, get these things kind of out in the open as, you know, being wrong, morally wrong to propagate with our language, however, you know, insidiously they may be.
Yeah, language is important, as you say, and there's definitely things that we should avoid saying if they have some kind of deeper meaning. There is but then there is some kind of threshold. There's certain things that we say, oh, that's too far, whatever. I mean, there's certain things that we should definitely avoid saying, though, even though the person might not mean it in that way. You would avoid saying that. I don't think, when school kids, for example, they might say something's gay to mean bad or something, for example, and of course we should avoid saying such terms, even if that person who said it isn't an intentional homophobe or something like that. But at the same time, there's things that it might have some kind of historical or slightly deeper meaning, but it would go kind of too far into like offense culture not to use. One example of this is like hysteria. Whenever like there's hysteria driven by the media, I use the term and say, this is mass hysteria driven by the media. I've been called sexist before for using that term because apparently this word has historical context with
Like a
some
hysterectomy and things like that. Like
yeah.
it's a reference to um the ovaries maybe, or uterus.
Okay. Apparently, it does have some kind of like sexist historical connotations, but again, I think it's been just so removed from that I think it's just kind of almost silly not to use it where it is appropriate, because we need a word for hysteria, right? Well, I don't know. I can't really think of another term as to when like the media drives a mass hysteria. So there are certain things. Whereas, I don't think that's the same with the example of the school kids, like calling something like gay to mean bad. Like you instantly think of that thing and then
Negative
meaning
connotation. Yeah.
exactly, right?
Akash just said that it means womb. Okay, interesting. And I guess it kind of begs the question, in kind of like wanting these changes in people's language to be adopted, are is that kind of the axis on which you would say like there are extreme versus non-extreme vegans? I mean, on the way extreme end, in the negatives, people who aren't vegan, they'll be like, oh, I'm vegan, but my husband eats meat and I cook it for him all the time. Like, to each their own, live and let live, the ultimate kind of weird hypocrisy kind of stuff.
Mm.
Versus like, maybe there's somebody who they eat a plant-based diet, they don't attend things like SeaWorld, etc. They don't buy any animal skin or fur, things like that to wear. They check their products to be sure that they're not tested on animals. But they just, let's say they don't tell anybody about it. They kind of just do it on their own, and they don't really even like want to identify with the vegan club kind of thing. Versus like, I guess the most extreme adopters of the ideology. Like, would you and I be at that most extreme, do you think? Or do you think that the people who would be quote unquote most extreme would be maybe people who are not that I know of anybody doing this, or that anybody is necessarily doing this, but people who are um, theoretically in favor of like destruction of property that's used to effectuate animal abuse and things like that?
Yeah, well, I don't even think you need to be that extreme, to be honest, to be in favour of taking radical action that includes vandalism. I wouldn't. I mean, it's certainly extreme in comparison to societal beliefs, where carnism is the norm. But I guess we wouldn't call this an extreme action if done about anything else. I mean, even people who support the animal holocaust would not call it extremists if a bunch of Chinese animal rights activists broke into a dog farm, released all the dogs, and burnt it down. They wouldn't even call that extreme. They would just clap them. This is people, this is non-vegans would clap this.
They probably would.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't even know what it means, to be honest, when people say a vegan is like extreme, unless we're talking about like literally murdering people. Yeah, no, this would be a vegan extremist action. But as far with regards to how this plays into language, yeah, I definitely think the more seriously you take veganism, the more you'd be likely to avoid use of certain language. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely imagine that the person who's like a massive apologist, who's, you know, I cook meat for my husband and everything, and I don't force my views on anything else. Yeah, I'm sure they would be like calling people stuff like ignorant pig and stuff like that, and you would kind of expect that from them. Whereas someone who was like me or you, who actually takes it seriously, yeah, we would like, I guess, more so avoid using certain language.
Right. And I mean, what you said about the dog farm, and how like carnists, like Western carnists would be in favor of destroying it. It kind of reminds me of the reducitarian angle of like, you know, telling people that, you know, abolition is too extreme or too lofty of a goal. It's hard to imagine um, people who say that being in favor of people in Korea, for example, advocating for reduced dog meat consumption, or you know,
Yes.
better, more humane versions of killing the dogs. You know?
Yeah, great point. Yeah, I imagine there are a lot of like reducitarian vegans who would not hold that position. You know, fair play to some of their consistency. There are some reducitarians in the vegan movement, and fair play to them because they're consistent. They would hold this position if it was dogs in Korea, and they might even hold this position if we were talking about human slavery. But yeah, for the most part, I don't think reducitarians are consistent in their outlook.
Yeah. Um, and I guess this kind of brings me to the idea of like wild animal suffering. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Humane Hancock, but a while
He's my
back,
friend. Yeah, yeah.
oh, great. So he had made some content about how vegans should care about this and how it's kind of a blind spot
Hmm.
among vegans. I guess I'll just ask in a general sense, like what your thoughts are on the suffering of, I don't like to use the term wild animals personally, but I guess I'll just say animals in the wild.
Yeah, it's very important. Do I have a solution for it? No. Does Humane Hancock have a solution for it? No. But it's he's trying to get the ball rolling. I've asked him about this. I even had him on my podcast and stuff, and you know, he's fair play to him. He's trying to get a conversation started because I think the arguments that vegans use to oppose trying to reduce wild animal suffering, I think, are inconsistent. They say, for example, and speciesist actually, they'll say stuff like, we shouldn't play God with animals in the wild. You know, who are we to play God? But they wouldn't say that if you cured a child from cancer. We're playing God when a child's in a hospital bed and we're giving them chemotherapy. So why is it okay to play God with a human child? What's so special about a human child that we play God with them, but then an antelope we don't play God to help them? There's no morally relevant trait difference.
I think I understand. So you're saying that basically, like at least in that in answering that criticism of preventing wild animal suffering, are you saying that like playing God isn't necessarily a bad thing?
Playing God is great. We should absolutely do it. You know, if God exists, He's not doing a very good job of reducing suffering. So humans need to play God. Humans are the species. If we're, you know, I would like to do a reversal of what the carnists say. So carnists say we're the dominant species, therefore we have the right to rule over the other species on the planet. No, I'm gonna flip this, right? We're the dominant species, so we have the obligation to help the other species on this planet. We should use our power to protect, not to harm. So if we're the dominant species, with great power comes great responsibility, right? Is the quote, and I absolutely agree with that. The more powerful we are, the more responsible we are in actually helping to stop the suffering that goes throughout the wild. For it's not just in our own society. I agree that yes, it's more practical to focus on our own society first than animals being murdered in the systemic human holocaust that's happening every day. But that doesn't mean that wild animals suddenly just have no moral value and that we shouldn't play God with them. I mean, why shouldn't we play God with them? They're like, I can't see a good argument for why we shouldn't.
Yeah, I think you bring up some good points. One thing I would ask you is I know that you made a video about Vegan Gains and his views on wild animal or so-called wild animal suffering. Is it safe to say that you're not in favor of intervening in the, I guess, broader animal kingdom in the wild, so to speak, in a way that would involve like ending animals' lives if we deem them kind of too destructive to the lives of other animals?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about the killing predators debate, yeah, I've heard the whole name the trait argument for it. With the whole xenomorph running around and killing humans, and we would shoot that xenomorph, right? And then I'd say, okay, but then we wouldn't shoot the lion, and then you say, okay, we'll name the trait. I can't name that trait, right? So I completely understand that there is like a logical inconsistency there. Do I think that based on that logical inconsistent we should actually do this? I'm not so sure. And I have two counter arguments essentially as to why like we potentially should not do this or should not entertain this. One is that I believe that this is just a very, very bad optics for the animal rights movement. If carnists suddenly now are hearing that vegans want to shoot wild animals, that's not a good look. And I don't think we're going to get as large an animal rights movement as possible if we start promoting the idea of killing carnivores. As far as the logical consistency stuff, okay, I admit it, I've been beaten. I can't name the trait, right? Boom, you got me. But you can also apply a reductios the other way. And Vegan Gains even did this in, someone sent him he sent them a snippet of my video about the fact that he wants to kill predatory animals. And I would say Vegan Gains got reductioed by one of the points that I brought up. I said, hypothetically, let's say we have a toddler who we know is never going to go vegan. We have a crystal ball and we know this toddler is never going to go vegan. Would you shoot the toddler? Now, most people who are just, what's the term? Who don't have something wrong with them would say, well, yeah, that is a horrible thing to think about. Or, God, yeah, shooting a toddler in the head just because they're never going to be vegan. What a horrific thought. Richard was just there on the live stream and he was just like, yeah, shoot the toddler. What's the problem? Now, I can't see how that's not a reductio because you just end up saying exactly what a carnist would when you do name the trait with animals and humans. You would end up just committing a human holocaust of non-vegans, non-vegan children. I mean, so the reductios both work both ways. Yes, I admit it. I'm inconsistent by not shooting the lion if I'd shoot the xenomorph, right? That's an inconsistent position to hold. But then if you want to be so consistent the other way that you would literally murder a non-vegan child, I'd say that's a reductio in that other way as well. So there's reductios you can apply both ways.
Sounds like you've thought about this a lot.
Yeah, it's a real headfuck, basically. So I have thought about it a lot. And you know what? Basing it off my first point alone, I don't even think it's something that we should be thinking about too much. Mm-hmm. We've in the UK, we've got fox hunting, right? And the public is now predominantly on our side as to why fox hunting is bad, and that will warm them to the further animal rights message as to why murdering cows and murdering sheep and pigs is bad. The point is we've got them on our side about animal murder now. The public now supports a ban on fox hunting. This is great in the UK. Imagine if vegans just flip the switch on that and go, oh, by the way, now the new vegan mantra is we do support fox hunting. I mean, I just can't see how anyone's gonna start seeing vegans as anything other than just fucking lunatics.
Something that you said reminds me of when talking to vegetarians. You know, you said that the public where you are is greatly in favor of banning fox hunting, and this kind of reminds me of um, like in my advocacy when I've seen people try to kind of jump down the throats, so to speak, of vegetarians when they state that they're vegetarian, um, and immediately start talking about dairy and how cruel it is and things like that. I think that maybe a good tactic to use would actually to be to analyze the reasons why people are against things like fur, because I think um, it's very clear to people that there's a complete lack of necessity when it comes to wearing animals fur. And I think that we could actually use that kind of logic. Like
Mm.
you mentioned that that this could be kind of a way to warm people up to veganism. And I've actually thought about this for a while too, with regards to if single issue campaigns like about, let's say fur or puppy mills or SeaWorld, for example, zoos, rodeos, things like that, are worth being there to protest. And if it might be better to, let's say, be there and just promote veganism outright, or be somewhere kind of more neutral, just with a lot of people there and promote veganism outright. What are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think that that should be like single issue campaigns should be promoted? And I guess like it's also worth mentioning briefly that some people I've heard some people also characterize vegans who are not, I guess, intersectional, maybe if that's the right word, in our advocacy as being single issue vegans, in that the only issue that we're concerned with is veganism and the promotion of veganism. Maybe that's a different topic, but when I see single issue campaign, I'm saying that with regard to like um, select uses of non-human animals. Like, do you think that it's worth coalition building, I guess, with groups of people protesting against something that they're they believe strongly in, strongly in abolishing, but at the same time maybe they're wearing shoes made of cows, or maybe they're going to go stop by a steakhouse and eat a cow on their way home.
So yeah, I guess I do believe in to some extent in single issue advocacy, so long as it has a strong vegan message tied into it as well. That said, I wouldn't, go full on Gary Francione and almost advocate against some sort of campaign where we've massively got our foot in the door, like ending bear bile farming in China and Vietnam. Holy shit, if a petition went up right now just saying, sign here and we can end the bear bile farming trade, even if it had no strong vegan message attached to it, even if it was just like the thing largely supported by carnists, I would still sign that petition, right?
Right.
Because the bear bile farming trade is just, I don't know if you know much about it, but oh my god, it's just the most horrific and evil thing I've ever fucking seen.
Let
Like
me
it
let
is.
me just pause you on there if I could. What if there was a petition just to say that, which said that instead of keeping these bears, let's say they're kept in 6 foot by 6 foot cages, let's keep
Mm.
them in 10 foot by 10 foot cages. Would you also sign that?
Uh, yeah, these things are horrible because I don't know if people listening to this live stream know, but in bear bile farming, the cages are, well, they're not even, I wouldn't even call them cages. It's just like their body is just literally stuck, like the bamboo or whatever it is just like on them. It's less of a cage and more of like a straitjacket almost. And these bears are just in this almost straitjacket made of bamboo for up to like 20 something years. It's just such a horrific, horrific thing that, yeah, let's say there was some kind of petition that come out and say, okay, this is a petition to increase the cages, so they're now going to be 10 foot by 10 foot or whatever. Would it be, well, it would be a huge head scratcher for a start. But But no, I'm not sure it would be ethical to sign it, because it would ask questions such as, why isn't there just a petition just to end it? I don't get why we wouldn't just have the petition instead to end it. I guess you could push me further with this hypothetical and say, well, let's say that just wasn't the solution and stuff like that. And that's where it gets really tough to talk about. But yeah, there's some things like these philosophical conundrums that I just cannot give any convincing answer to. And it's funny because I know a lot of people get me on their streams and they're like, yeah, no, let's have George on here and he'll give this really unique and interesting answer to the audience and they can have a good way of answering this. I'm afraid to say there's certain stuff that I just can't give a good answer to, and people might be disappointed in the audience and think, well, why don't you have a good answer to this? And the answer is, I just don't know. It's just so hard to think about, because I think if I was in that position, if I was in the Bears' position, would I want someone to sign a petition saying, well, actually, we're going to keep George in a 10-foot by 10-foot cage instead of he's just restrained like this on his front for 20 years? Would I want them to sign the petition? Possibly, yes. Would I just much, 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 much rather that it just ended? Yeah, obviously.
Yeah. I think something that's important to also consider is the downstream effects of putting into law some practices that the public at large might end up viewing as ethical, and kind of be able to perpetuate that practice in good conscience, which may actually work counter to the abolitionist goal.
You're right. I guess one thing we have here, though, is that slaughter, even with during the best conditions, whatever it is that these industries are putting out there, when they say, don't worry, this is RSPCA approved and all this kind of stuff, would be the thing in the UK, it still always looks horrific. It always looks bad. So even with that, at least there is some kind of thing where, let's say, hypothetically, all farming in the US or the UK, whatever, was, they were on these green pastures and they were treated very well, whatever, they would still ultimately all be sent to even if they were unconscious before they were murdered, still a brutal and horrific execution. So there's always that at least to fall back on. But yeah, I understand your point, of course. Does this feed into a culture where we think that treatment is just such a good thing that it almost justifies animal oppression? So that is definitely one danger of welfarism.
Right. And another example is I don't know if you guys have Canada Goose, the clothing, like they make like coats and things like that company. Yeah. So there had been a lot of campaigns against the fact that they would shoot like coyotes or like wild dogs. They would lay traps, and then the dogs would get caught in the traps, and then somebody would come and shoot them with a gun. And they pledged to stop using fur at some point. And I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe still at this time, they're still using down, feathers that are plucked out of live ducks or geese. And I just don't see the same pressure on them. Maybe it's just the ebbs and flows of my social internet environment, but I don't see the same kind of pressure on them now that they've made that pledge. So it's kind of like they've almost gotten the activists like off their back, as it were. And all the injustices, the horrific injustices that they're still profiting from, are being not being addressed.
No, you're absolutely right. It was, while it was good to hear that they had done that, it was also kind of weird because it's just like, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Well, they're still using down. So this again could be another drawback of single issue campaigns. It's great now for the coyotes that they've not selling fur. Is it great for the geese? Is it a step backwards for the geese? Have we now sort of promoted this idea that geese matter less as a result of protesting specifically the fur? But then people could counter them by saying, if you just singled out Canada Goose and you said they should stop using all animal products whatsoever, why aren't you doing this to the other companies? And Canada Goose could just very easily reply that. It's like, why are you asking us to just no longer use fur and down? Why aren't you asking Nike and Adidas and Hugo Boss? And you can name every clothes company pretty much on the planet. So there's always counter arguments to every single side of this thing. It's a tough one.
Yeah, it kind of is a game of whack-a-mole in a way, you know. If you
Yeah.
protest fur, and then the next day in their display they have leather in the window, you know what I mean?
There's a comment here from Deemstars. It says people care more about the coyotes because they're cute. I think geese are way cuter than coyotes. Geese and ducks are so cute. I do think they're cuter, but that's just my personal opinion.
I wanted to answer this question because I think it raises an interesting point here, and something about it reminds me of a vision that I have for the future, where Akash has said, if we fed lab-grown meat to obligate carnivores, would their fundamental nature change in a few generations? I'm not sure if their fundamental natures would change, but I could personally be very happy with a world where, assuming, like, I guess I'll just say as a prelogue, technology moves in such a rate that, like, we can't even right now imagine what the technology is going to be like in probably 150 years. Like,
Yeah.
it seems like magic to people of the past, like absolute magic. So if there was a way to, I mean, whether if it was inexpensive or not, I mean, if we could just, like, as cheaply as we produce a block of tofu, if we could just lab generate flesh, like it was nothing. I think that I could be very happy with a world where we intervened in nature to feed obligate carnivores. Like, we could airdrop packages, bundles, pallets of engineered flesh, and if that meant that an animal doesn't get eaten alive, I think that would be a fantastic outcome.
Absolutely, I would 100% support that, and I think it would be bizarre that any vegan wouldn't. I think it's a shame we see such appeal to nature fallacies even amongst vegans in the movement. Don't intervene with nature. Oh, it's carnivores' nature to hunt wild animals and stuff like that. It's like, dude, you literally sound like a carnist now. So I really can't. Yeah, I can't see any counter argument as to why we should not feed carnivores lab-grown meat as a way to get them stopping murdering herbivorous animals, and to if the population of herbivorous animals needs to controlling to sterilize them or whatever.
Yeah, and I think this is actually especially relevant to us because the vegan world that we want to see is obviously going to just completely obviate the need for monocropping and that kind of thing to a great extent. And if that happens, ideally that land will rewild. And if it does rewild, I mean, you're going to have a lot more non-human animals eating each other's faces off, whether they're coyotes or ants or what have you. So I think that if we can materialize that reality where we're feeding these other animals, I think that would take a lot of stress pressure off of the quote unquote prey animals.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to do. Yeah, as I say, even though I know I have inconsistent logic on it with the xenomorph thing, I know that the shooting predators, even though I don't support the shooting predators thing, we do need to do something about the fact that animals are being murdered in the wild for sure. And I think this could be a good solution.
Yeah. I kind of want to shift angles if we could completely, and just talk a little bit about, I guess, whether you see veganism as like an inherently political position. And I guess if so, do you see it as more leaning toward any kind of particular political affiliation?
So I actually see it as speciesist to say that veganism is like political, because I believe there'll be certain political things that need to happen in order to create a vegan world, but this is the same as anything. Veganism is just a moral obligation. It's just about leaving others alone, not enslaving, not oppressing, not murdering. We wouldn't say it's not. You wouldn't say it's political to not mug someone on the street. You're not taking some kind of political act by Today, I refused to murder someone. It was a great political act that I took. No, it wasn't. Well, for a start, it wasn't an act. You didn't do anything. You just had it was just a moral obligation that you didn't go out and murder someone or mug someone or whatever it is. But there are certain things, but then where there could be political subsets to that argument, as in like, we need it codified into law that mugging people or murdering people is bad.
Right.
That's politics because it involves law, getting the legal system involved. But the simple inaction of just leaving others alone, the moral obligation, that's not political at all. And just as not mugging someone doesn't lean left or right, neither does not gassing a pig.
So you're saying there could theoretically be like a vegan political party, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're, like, ultimately, if we wanted a vegan world, just as if we wanted a world where we didn't murder humans, there would be politics involved in that, because you want to change the political system. But that doesn't necessarily mean that not murdering humans is political.
Yeah. You mentioned like law and things being codified into law. Do you think that there's a feasible way to codify into law this kind of doctrine of non-commodification or non-exploitation, which is actually enforceable?
At present, it wouldn't work to enforce it. We need individuals change before the system can change. Because if the system was to just change tomorrow, and the system just said, let's say hypothetically I become Prime Minister of the United Kingdom tomorrow and I just say, right, all meat consumption is banned now. Well, I mean, it just wouldn't work. There'd be, and this is what's sad about humans, there'd be riots on the street, there'd be people calling for my head, which just shows how pathetic humans are, that's what they would riot about, the fact that they can no longer murder and oppress animals. So yeah, at the moment, making some kind of big political change like that wouldn't work. You kind of need the public on your side first. And politicians, by the way, they just tend to do whatever's popular to stay in. This is why politicians don't really care about issues of injustice, as Gary Yourofsky said. They just kind of... And they always say things that go back on what they've said. I mean, if you look at Joe Biden and Barack Obama, way before they ever became president, both of them opposed gay marriage. Then as soon as they got into the White House, they magically now support gay marriage, because of course that's what they've got to do to stay in. That's probably so just on a slightly tangential note, we can't trust politicians to really care about issues of like equality and injustice as such. They just kind of, it's more about power. They just tick the certain boxes they need to get into the White House or 10 Downing Street or wherever they are.
Mm-hmm. Since you mentioned gay marriage, for example, it brings up this idea I've heard in different vegan circles about I guess how if somebody's vegan, or if somebody's not vegan rather, and somebody's considering advocating for veganism to that person, if that individual, let's say, is just blatantly homophobic or has homophobic views even, that it's a priority, and not only is it a priority, but it's a necessity to get that person on board with gay rights, I guess you could call it, or just, abandoning their homophobia, in order to be able to convince them that veganism is the morally correct stance for them to adopt. Do you think that that's the case? Like, do you think that somebody needs to be convinced of egalitarian or like equality based philosophy in order to adopt the philosophy that non-humans should be morally considered and not oppressed?
Not necessarily. I think people are very kind of pick and choose with what they deem to be, with how they discriminate often. Discrimination is arbitrary and inconsistent, right? But people, just as we have gay rights activists who aren't vegan and who oppress animals, you can get vegans who are homophobic. So I don't. Well, it's good that there'd be neither a speciesist or a homophobe. I don't see it as how you'd need to be one in order to be convinced of the other. I mean, human justice activists are living proof of this. So 99% of human rights activists who are against racism, who are against homophobia, who are against sexism aren't even vegan. They've been convinced that homophobia and sexism are wrong, even though they're not convinced that speciesism is wrong. So likewise, someone can be convinced that speciesism is wrong without being convinced that homophobia or sexism is wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly heard vegans gatekeep veganism and state that, for example, like, I don't know, if somebody does violate some kind of human related social construct that we've had, like some rights based idea, whether let's say it's the belief that children shouldn't be physically abused, for example, that they couldn't be vegan, for example. And I think like this is something that I've seen more from people on the left. This kind of like saying like, if you march, like, like people will say they don't want people who are, let's say, supremacists in any form, I guess, whether it's patriarchal supremacist or racial supremacist or what have you, any person with any kind of hierarchical elevation of their own group in their mind as opposed to another group in an arbitrary fashion. The idea that if we permit those individuals to join our movement, which I don't even know what that means, to permit somebody to join your movement, but I've heard a lot of gatekeeping, I guess, and I'm not saying gatekeeping in a negative sense, because I certainly gatekeep. I mean, if somebody's like, oh, I'm vegan, but I eat honey once in a while, I'm a huge fan of gatekeeping in that regard. I just am not convinced that, I guess what it comes down to is like, let's say somebody does beat their child, or somebody is blatantly sexist or homophobic or racist toward other humans. I'm not convinced that that person would be doing anything better for themselves or for the world if they were to go in a direction counter to veganism. You know what I mean? If they were to go in a direction counter to non-exploitation of animals, if they were to contribute more and start, instead of putting $1,000 into their weekly or monthly or whatever animal exploitation fund, if they were to start putting $2,000 into it, per unit of time, I would see that as an outright undesirable consequence. And I think any vegan should agree that, like, if somebody is going to go toward the direction of respecting the sovereignty or the personhood of other animals, that that should be a welcome change. I'm not saying that we should accept the premises that underlie their discriminatory attitudes and beliefs, but I'm saying that I think that we should definitely not steer them away from veganism. And also, I think there's something to be said for like what Gary Yourofsky has said about how if you raise a child from a young age and instill in them the idea that all species are important regardless of shape, color, and size, if we get them to reject species-based discrimination, that child, like, how could they even grow up to be discriminatory toward other humans? Like, I think the only instances that we see people being discriminatory toward other humans, despite holding quote unquote vegan values, is when those discriminatory beliefs toward other humans have preceded the arrival of the vegan connection or something like it in their lives.
Yeah, so I always say to these like intersectionals and stuff who say like we can't have people in the vegan movement unless they tick this box and this box and this box and that box and that box. How small do you want the vegan movement to be? Like, this needs to be a global movement. We need everyone on board, regardless of their political views. when it comes to actually kicking activists out of like certain activist spaces, the only time due to views they have or whatever, the only time I would agree with that is if they are A, actively discriminating against other activists and stuff with their views, or B, if their views are so extreme that they literally pose a threat to the safety of other people in the group. I don't care if someone joins the group and they have just some they have some distasteful view about X group or whatever. And the reason for that is every single person has views that are considered oppressive or discriminatory to someone else. This idea of hashtag consistent anti-oppression actually doesn't exist. That's why I have it in my Instagram profile, kind of ironically. It's just to piss people off. Because they know that because I'm considered in the vegan movement to be, to have like oppressive beliefs by the intersectionals because I'm a centrist, right? I'm not on the far left. I'm very critical of groups like BLM and stuff, for example. So I'd be called, an ist for that of all sorts. But here's the thing. There's literally no one in the vegan movement who holds perfectly consistently anti-oppressive views across the board. It's literally not possible to do. If anyone wants just a shining example of this, right, I challenge anyone to do this who thinks, what are you talking about, George? I'm perfectly consistently anti-oppressive across the board. I don't even have a single discriminatory view. State what your view is on trans women using women's toilets, right? Whatever view you give on that, it will always, always, always be deemed marginalizing or discriminatory or oppressive or ist to someone else. There's no view you can give on just that one question alone. So I like to use that as a shining example. So the minute we start saying, well, you don't tick this box, so you can't come into this group. You don't tick this box. Well, why do these people think they have a monopoly on what it means to be anti-oppressive when, to millions of people worldwide, these people are oppressive?
Bless you. How do you think that, I guess, we can kind of bridge the gap, so to speak, in terms of the different oppressions that people see within the human world, I guess one could say, in such a way that, I guess, I understand what you said about, we don't want to kick people out of activism events unless they hold views that pose a threat to the safety of others. Philosophically speaking, do you think that there's anything that could be adopted in terms of a mantra or some kind of doctrine or something that would facilitate more justice throughout the world, I guess? And I guess maybe another thing to consider is that should we reinforce the idea that veganism is patently about non-human animals and just try to put everything aside when we're discussing, advocating for, supporting one another across the aisle, as it were, for the cause for animals? Or do you think that it's better to kind of maybe collectively admit some kind of hypocrisy when it comes to applying anti-oppressive ideals consistently, and then just kind of almost absorb it like a punch to the stomach, and then kind of just move forward with humans being included in it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, we have to roll with the punches here, and we have to actually commit what's called the paradox of intolerance. A lot of people, because in my debate with Catherine Klein, for example, which was on Debug Your Brain's channel, it was a really great conversation, by the way. I really enjoyed it.
I caught a good deal of that.
Yeah. She said, George, I don't think you're taking the paradox of intolerance into account. Now, the paradox of intolerance, for anyone who's unaware, is when you say that we need to tolerate others by tolerating their views which are marginalizing to others. So by saying I want an inclusive vegan movement, and therefore I want people of all parts of the political spectrum to be in it, I'm apparently committing the paradox of intolerance there. Yeah, guess what? I am. But so are leftists. There's no way they can actually, again, apply this consistently. So if they were to, for example, say, George, you're committing the paradox of intolerance. By allowing Trump supporters in the animal rights movement, you are making immigrants feel unsafe while at demos, and this marginalizing them. That is not inclusive. That is the opposite of building inclusive. So you're an inclusive movement. Therefore, you're committing the paradox of intolerance. Well, you could just do this straight back to them. I can just fire it straight back at them. If a gay man said to them before a demo, "Hi, I feel unsafe. There's Muslims at this march, and Islam murders thousands of gay people every year," would that intersectional then say, "You're right, we'll kick all the Muslims out of the march for you"? No, of course they wouldn't. So everyone commits what's called the paradox of intolerance, right? You have to say to someone in any case, look, I get that there's people here in this space that have views that are very different from yours, and you might even find them offensive in some way. But as long as they if they pose an actual threat to your safety, we'll deal with that. But unfortunately, we're just going to have to roll with each other's differences here, because we have to unite on just the one thing. One thing unites us all in the animal rights movement, guys. And that is the fact that we do not see animals as commodities, and we want animal oppression to end. We're never going to agree on abortion. We're never going to all agree on gun control. We're never all going to agree on gender pronouns or trans women using women's toilets. No one is going to ever all just one day magically tick all these boxes, and then the whole world just unites with all these boxes ticked. That's not going to happen. So we have to just roll with the fact that, unfortunately, we all have fucking different views on everything.
I think something that's important to keep in mind is that if we, like I said, with regard to Gary Yourofsky, is that if we actually come into the world with a vegan upbringing, that the likelihood of having differences and focusing on, I mean, not having differences, but I guess the extent to which we would focus on our differences would also minimize extremely. I think like there's great wisdom in what you said about focusing on our commonality, in that we are against animal exploitation or animal commodification,
Yeah.
and just focus on that. And there's always a time and a place for discussions to be had about all sorts of differences when it comes to interhuman issues. But I think that when the joining concept is the abolition of animal use, or I guess animal exploitation, abuse, commodification. If we all agree on that, then I think it only serves to hurt the animals if we reduce the number of people who are vocally for that cause. If there's an animal rights march and people say that they would rather not march alongside people who hold particular views when it comes to humans, I think that only hurts, the impact that march can have.
Yeah, and as I say, I just want to reiterate, if someone does have views that are legit unsafe to others, like they have such extremist position, like let's say we have someone turn up at a march and their belief is that X group of people should be executed. Yeah, obviously I don't want those in that space. They're a danger to other people. But the idea that we should exclude people from marches because they just have views that others subjectively deem to be like marginalizing or offensive or oppressive. No, we can't do that, because that's literally everyone. We'd have 0 people at the march, because there's no such person in existence who has views that are just deemed fully anti-oppressive across the board. It doesn't exist.
There's a couple questions that this brings to mind. One is like, maybe this is me overthinking this, but like when people say like, join the club, for example, or like glad to have you along or something like that, or like fell off the vegan wagon, things like that. Do you think that that kind of language sends the wrong idea in terms of like what veganism is? Like, do you think that it kind of imbues this idea of tribalism into the conversation, which ought not pertain to like a baseline moral philosophy?
Say the quotes again. Just remind me
Like,
of what you
if
said.
somebody just says like, um, happy to have you in the club or something like that,
I
or just
see.
like, or even like, this kind of, this is worth mentioning here, so I don't kind of pose it as a whole nother question. This idea that someone can be quote unquote vegan for the animals. I mean,
Yeah.
as of late, I've kind of realized that that kind of implicitly states that there are other things for which somebody can be vegan.
Yes, but I'll tell you what, I think maybe in this case it's actually kind of important to state it because there's all this confusion about what it is. But you're right, maybe that also plays, it's like a kind of paradox because then that
Chasing your tail
also,
kind of thing. Yeah.
yes, it plays into the idea that there are other reasons to be vegan when there's not. Um, as for the whole potential tribalism idea by saying, join the club, welcome to the family and stuff, building community is important. I think it is okay to say stuff like this. I think because especially has right as with regards to the fact that people like to feel normal and they don't like to feel lonely. And when people go vegan, they might often experience feelings of like isolation and stuff like that. They certainly would do. Like let me give you a little example, okay? When I first watched Gary Yourofsky's speech, and it got me looking into the path of going vegan. My best friend at the time went vegan with me, and we didn't. So if I wasn't like if I didn't know him, I think it would have been a much more isolating experience. And then luckily I got into the social media, started adding people more on Facebook and just got into the
You
community.
discover vegan memes.
Yes. And it
You
massively.
discover Nooch.
Yes, exactly. There's that great meme as well. It's like, where where are all your vegan friends or something? And I think it's like Owen Wilson's at the computer. He just turns around and says, they're in the computer, which
Yeah.
is kind of the funny thing. But yeah, no, I think it is good to build that sense of community. So yeah, of course you can get carnists say stuff like you're a cult and all this bullshit, but that's only because they don't realize themselves that they are part of an
The biggest
ideology that
cult.
themselves. Yes, exactly, and that's because carnism is the dominant belief system. And Melanie Joy talks about this a lot in her work. When you're part of the dominant belief system, when you hold the dominant belief system, you don't really realize that you're part of like a cult or part of like an ideology, or that you conform to an ideology when actually you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, George, I know that I had told you that we would try to keep it to about an hour, and it's coming on almost two, but it's
Never
been a lot of
happens.
fun
Don't
talking to
worry.
you.
Yeah,
Um,
you too.
I want to just address this question here that Reasonable Vegan had been asking. I know he had asked some questions before the stream that unfortunately we didn't get to, but he asked, I guess, if we could answer if we're human supremacists, and says that that could be answered in the burning building question, whether we would save a stranger human or a stranger dog. I guess I would answer in saying that, well, for one, like it depends. It depends on the human and it depends on the dog. If I know absolutely nothing about them, I'll save the human, um, just because I think that that human has more potential to make a positive difference in the world, and has more potential well-being to enjoy.
Yeah, I think all hypotheticals, let's say remove the whole who's closer to the point of entry or who the human is and who the dog is. Let's just say they're
Sure.
both equally close to the point of entry. We don't know who either one are. I would actually save the dog, and I guess I would give the opposite reason of you. I'd actually say humans have the potential to cause more harm, more suffering. So by saving obviously it's a horrible situation to be in, and I
Of
would
course.
save a single human from a burning building. But by saving, yeah, I guess I would save the dog because dogs simply do not cause, they don't cause any suffering or any of the kind of horrific stuff that humans do. The human in there could well be like someone who's not only brutalizing animals every day, they could be like a child molester or something. You just have no idea. So yeah, I'd save the dog.
Yeah, I guess my answer is based off this hope that that person could end up being like the next Earthling Ed or something like that, where they're making a huge impact and kind of helping turn the tide against all the oppressive actions of their fellow humans.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is a very powerful thing that a tiny minority of humans are capable of. Unfortunately, though, most people in the world just are not on the side of justice, and they commit horrific injustices every day through their purchasing habits and have literally no interest in changing. So the overwhelming chances, while it could be, you know, an Earthling Ed type or someone who's that human, the overwhelming chances it's just someone who just doesn't give a shit.
That's a fair point. It's something to definitely think on more. But George, I don't want to take more of your time. I really appreciate your coming on here. I think it's been really fascinating discussion. I think it's refreshing to be able to kind of riff through a lot of the different kind of topics that we talked about that kind of are both central and auxiliary to veganism. And I really appreciated your time and your thoughts and everything like that kind of being brought into this very thoughtfully. So thanks again for coming on. And yeah, thanks to everybody who viewed. And I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to add or anything like that, George, before we close it out here.
Yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. Really good chat. Thank you, Haz. Everyone subscribe to Haz's channel. It's very important that we subscribe to vegan YouTubers because currently the YouTube activism space is just dominated by one, two, three, maybe vegan YouTubers. All the rest, when you type in vegan on YouTube, it's just cooking channels and stuff. When it comes to animal rights activism, it's just like maybe two or three activists who just have a triopoly or something you could call it on that. So please, everyone, subscribe to vegan animal rights YouTubers such as Haz. Very
Yeah,
important.
I appreciate it. And I think for anybody also watching, if you are vegan and you are doing advocacy, I can't urge you enough to just make a YouTube channel, put your content out there, shamelessly promote your channel, and help people help you to get your message out. The animals need it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, George.
Thank you,
Really
Haz. Yep.
appreciate it. Yep.
Cheers, guys. Bye bye.
Yep. Take it easy. Bye.